as to why positive uncertainties or opportunities are also treated as a risk. With this basic understanding of risk, where it's both positive and negative uncertainties, there's another aspect which we got to understand before we look on at the process of risk management. That is what is called as your risk averse, which is dependent on the risk tolerance capabilities. Now, the risk tolerance capabilities of individuals is basically how much risk can you handle as an individual. Based on your capabilities and your tolerance levels, which is also dependent on your temperament, it is called as people. When I say people, it includes both individuals and the organization, are classified as risk averse, risk seeking, and risk neutral. That is, people who are not ready to take risk. Under any circumstance. Come what may, are treated as risk averse. Their risk tolerance is very, very low. Such people or such organizations go through risk neutral and risk averse are not the same, Surya Naka. I will just come back to you, Surya Samprad. I am explaining risk neutral also, then we'll take it on, right? So risk averse are those people who do not want to take any risk at all. So such people or organizations go through meticulous planning, ensure that their plans are foolproof, they have contingency plans one after the other, and only after everything is in place, they start their activities. These risk neutral people are those people who are prepared to take things as it comes along. They know that when you undertake any project, it's always possible that the unexpected might happen. But then they also believe that just because I fear that something unexpected will happen, I do not spend a lot of time sitting and trying to identify all these unknown activities. The known ones which based on my past experience of executing similar projects, what are the possible areas where we can have pitfalls, where certain risks can arise? They look at it and then do their plans and start their work. The risk-seeking category, on the contrary, are those people who are fully aware that risk will be there, but they say that let's not waste a lot of time sitting and trying to prepare for this risk. They feel it's a waste of time sitting and planning for all this risk. They say that as anyhow we are going to face this risk, so let us start the work, and as and when the drama unfolds, when we encounter such situations where there is problems, we will handle them so that we do not lose out on the time element. They feel that they have to take advantage of the early start that they will be getting. Based on this, such incidents or such tolerances are built based on the strong organizational capabilities and the capabilities of the individual project team members. When you know that you have a very competent team and that they can do something when they encounter a situation, you possibly will take on more risk than you normally will. Also, depending on the value of the project, in case certain uncertainties can prove to be very costly, then you possibly will be either risk neutral or risk seeking. Therefore, the broad categorization of these three people based on their risk tolerance is that risk seeking, they go, I would say, not ill-prepared, but not completely prepared. With whatever plans they have, they start, and as the events keep happening, they keep developing their plans and progressing. The risk-neutral people, based on their past experiences, they make plans, but they're also ready to take on certain percentage of uncertainty, which can happen or may not happen. Whereas the risk-averse people do not want to take any chance. They go scrutinize their plans thoroughly, look at the external conditions, the internal conditions, all these elements, and then find alternatives for them. Possibly they would have one or more alternatives that in case this doesn't work, we will do this and then we will do that. And then they start, once their plans are in place, checked and cross-checked by various levels, they start executing their work. Manisha, you can just try to check your speaker settings in case you have to increase the volume, or if it is muted, please remove the mute. Is that okay, Surya, now for you? Next, there was one question. Can you give me an example of a positive uncertainty? For example, you are in the business of software development, and as you are doing the process, there is a possibility of you taking on some additional work which has come on, that they want you to do some new features or some additional new work which will add on to your revenue bottom line. Basically, when you speak of these things, they are all contributing in increasing your revenues. But now if with the small dedicated resources which you have with you, you start taking on that additional work also, possibly your resources will be stretched much more than they are planned to be utilized, and at the same time it can jeopardize your main project objectives. How we handle these risks, we'll take it up when we come on to the actual planning, risk response and monitoring them. But as of now, the thing is that anything which though might be an opportunity for you, but by diverging away from your main project objectives, which adds a burden to your no, there is a clarification question. I hope people are able to see the chat also. There is a question which says that I estimate for projects for 500 days, but I implemented new methodology and it turned out into 450 days. Is this a positive uncertainty? No, this is not a positive uncertainty. Positive uncertainty, now as you keep doing your time management, when you see that you are doing work faster, you look at it. Now again I would say that this can also be a negative uncertainty, because if you are able to do it 10% ahead of schedule, which is quite a huge amount in such large project, possibly there's some element which is missing, either in your estimating techniques or in your working methodology, where people could have taken shortcuts, or there could be a quality compromise or something. This possibly will not be treated as a positive uncertainty. A positive uncertainty which is actually throwing up an opportunity for you to capitalize and increase your business. Now just by reducing time, what is happening? This team has become free. But you as a project manager would not be addressing this. Now this becomes an issue for the main, your PMO's office or your parent organization, where they have to keep these 500 people engaged, this small team which was there for you for doing a project, to keep them gainfully engaged for the next 50 days. Otherwise they are going to sit idle. Therefore, for the organization, it turns out to be a positive uncertainty, but not for the project team as such. sometimes it is difficult to point an uncertainty if it is positive or negative at the beginning of the project or startup uncertainty. Based on your own experiences and analyzing of the facts and the situation, I'm sure you should be able to determine whether it is a positive, if it's going to have a positive impact or a negative impact. When they say the positive uncertainties, it is basically in terms of, organizational opportunities or advantages which the organization can get for enhancing their business capabilities. Whereas the negative uncertainty is the one which impacts the outcome of the risk. One more example for positive uncertainty. Okay. For example, especially during natural calamities, when there's an earthquake or a flood or something like that, when you are out onto risk mitigation activities, you have a certain objective of mitigating the risk of people, that is saving the losses either by taking evacuation activities or something like that. Now at the same time, there is an opportunity which arises wherein you can actually sell a lot of basic essential items which are required for people for their immediate use, like including drinking water, blankets, certain ready-to-eat food items, etc., etc. Now, if you start indulging in these marketing activities of selling the basic commodities to people, with the small task force that you have, you lose focus on your primary task, which is evacuation of people and getting them to safer areas of immediate medical aid, etc., etc. Now you have a limited number of team members who are doing these activities. Now if you distribute them between these two things, your main objective gets jeopardized, though you will have certain financial advantages here, but the project on a whole has suffered because you have not been able to deliver what you had promised to deliver. This is another example of a positive uncertainty which I can give. Is that fine? The other thing is the risk threshold. That is the limits to which you can or the organization can accept risk impact. That is, how much risk will I be able to tolerate? Now this is again fixed based on the impact that the risk will have on the objectives of the project. Now basically the main objectives of the project are those corners of the iron triangle, that is scope, cost, time and quality. So the risk threshold will definitely be different for all these four elements. Sometimes the risk threshold for time might be pretty large, that you can or you are ready to accept delays, but you will not be ready to accept variations in quality standards or in the scope of the project. Similarly, sometimes you will be ready to accept financial or cost overruns to a large extent, but time overruns not permitted. So you fix up your threshold based on the objectives of the project and the importance of the project. So how quickly should we finish it? Is it very, very essential that we stick to time? If time is of the essence of the project, that yes, no delays are accepted, possibly the risk threshold for time element is less, cost element would be slightly higher. That's how you fix up the risk thresholds. So basically the risk threshold is established by calculating the risk weightage, where you give probability to the various risk elements which can occur on your project and the possible impact that it will have. That is, in case the risk occurs, what is the additional expenditure that I will be incurring, to mitigate the risk. Now these two components, that is the probability and the impact, is based exclusively on the assessment of the conditions and the environment in which your project will be operating. This is again dependent for the same element of risk. That is, in case, for example, if you take, say, a server breakdown, work package is your X is possibly a development stage and Z is your implementation stage. Now, at the work package level, a server breakdown may not impact your work so much because you have certain backups. So you can switch over from one system to the other system and carry on with your work. It will not impose so much of a delay. Whereas at the implementation stage where you are doing your rollout and all that, suppose there is a server breakdown, the impact may be high because the business of somebody else will come to a grinding halt. Therefore, based on the actual assessments at what stage the work is being done, what are the elements which are affecting the work progress, you will calculate the impact. Similarly, for a work package, based on the time element, you might have different probabilities. For example, in the construction industry, the component of rain, when you look at it, depending on what is the nature of the work, whether it is an outdoor activity or an indoor activity, the probability of that event occurring is highlighted. That is, in case the work is scheduled during the non-monsoon season, the probability of a rain occurring will be very, very less, say 10%, and then it slowly keeps increasing when you reach the monsoon seasons. Depending on what sort of work is being done, suppose in the non-monsoon seasons you are doing most of your work which is outdoors. In case it rains once in a while, the impact will be very less. But at the same time, in case in the monsoon season you are doing work which is outdoors, the impact will be much more. But in case during the monsoon season you are doing work which is indoor, the impact will automatically reduce. Now, this is one element which you try to see or assess when looking at the various plans you have made for your project. Basically, the scope and the timelines. That is, okay, what is the schedule? What is the nature of work? How does that correlate or map with the risk event that is going to occur? A system failure or your, what you call, software malfunctioning at the developmental stage or where you are in the pilot run, the impact will be lesser as compared to the same thing happening during the rollout stage. The impact will be higher because you have to put in more number of people to ensure that this malfunctioning is corrected and rectified as early as possible, which may possibly not be done with a small team which you had used during your pilot stage or the developmental stage. Right? So you fill up these probabilities. Now these work packages or the way you identify and tabulate this is just a very illustrative list where we have shown work package or something. It could be in terms of the four major components, that is scope, cost, time and quality. So what are the factors which will affect the scope of the work? What are the factors which will affect the time element, schedule of the work? What are the factors which will affect the quality of the work? You start listing out all those individual items below these various headings. List out their probabilities by assessing the conditions and your plans, what is the impact, and then the expected monetary value is nothing but the product of probability into impact. This is also called as the probability impact matrix. Sometimes this is given in percentage, that is 0.1, 0.5, 0.6 and all. There are different ways of representing it. This is one method where we have used the values. Now this calculation will basically help you determine how you are going to categorize your risk and handle them. So any risk which has got a high monetary value possibly requires immediate addressing as compared to a risk which has got low monetary value. This basically comes into play when you are faced with multiple uncertainties, that 2-3 things have gone wrong and you got to decide which you got to address first. Well, Josephine, don't worry about whether your books are this thing, because the slides have been slightly modified currently. Your book should have been of a older version. The basic thing is if you have understood the concept. Right, Josephine? If you have understood the concept, the other things, figures are just very basic rudimentary ones which you should not worry about so much. Yeah, how is the last one got the positive value? That is, because of this positive uncertainty, you were able to possibly make a profit of 20,000, but then the probability of that happening is only 10%. So the actual value of that risk, that a positive event coming up and you making 20,000 profit is just about translated into, because the percentage of this event occurring is just 10%. That's why it's got a positive value. Since the impact is positive, it's a positive uncertainty. That's why you got a positive value. Right, Anand? Now basically you use this expected monetary value table in times of crisis where you got to handle multiple issues and then see which one we take on first, which we take on later, etc., etc. Risk categorization, there are different ways of categorizing risks depending on how you want to do it. You have to put them under external risk, you can call them internal, technical, project management, or other general management risks. Then again, when you come down to the actual project, it could be risks associated with the scope, with the schedule, cost, quality, resources, etc., etc. This is more of general tabulating which you do. Now, decision making under risk is again another cumbersome and not a very clearly specified method where you can predict that, okay, this decision making was accurate. Since the decision making itself is questionable, the outcome is again doubtful. Yeah, what is this slide? Karthikeyan? You have to be quick, Karthikeyan. Yeah, triple constraint does come in. In fact, that is what I told you, that scope is basically associated with these three components. Risk. That is, the risk to any of these triple constraints will have an impact on the outcome of your project objectives. Rather, not the triple constraint, it's on all those four elements of that iron triangle. That is scope, cost, time, which will in turn have an impact on the quality. Now, this decision tree method is a technique which you use to make decisions in uncertainty. This will basically help you in case your decisions go wrong or even if they turn out to be right. This will basically help you form some basis for future judgment that okay, possibly the technique or the method which you adopted was correct. So this helps you cross-check the events after they actually occur and you have taken decisions before they could occur. For example, in this case, we have just given a small illustration where you got to decide whether to buy a new car or an old car. The initial cost of buying the new car is about 20,000 and the cost of buying the old car is 15,000. But then because of the market conditions and all the other technological factors and other etc., the outcome of both is unknown. That is, you cannot be 100% sure that by buying a new car, you won't have any problems. Similarly, the case of the old car. But then, the probability of a new car failing, you assess as to what is the incidence or the history of this vehicle. For example, if you all remember initially in these Maruti vehicles with gas fittings came in, there were a lot of stories that it caught fire and etc. Now, if you haven't done your homework to find out why it caught fire, possibly you will assign a greater probability to this. But if you know and done your homework and come to the conclusion that yes, the gas vehicle had caught fire because of certain leakage and they had been using fire in this thing or they had used substandard kits which are not quality equipment in converting these vehicles from petrol, gas, because of which there were leakages and people had the habit of smoking in the vehicles, etc. It caught fire. Then you possibly give a lesser probability because nobody in your family smokes, so you are 100% sure that we will travel in the car. There's no incident of gas leakage being exposed to leakage fire. Now, it could happen because of somebody else's mistake. So, you give this probability. Or very recently, we have been reading in the newspapers that Hyundai and Toyota and all that, they have withdrawn a lot of their vehicles because of certain malfunctioning of some equipment. Now, based on your judgment of the market environmental conditions, you give what is the probability of it failing. And in case it fails and I have to get the vehicle repaired, how much will I have to be spending? Now here, since it's a new car, possibly a lot of things will get damaged and you spend more money on getting it rectified. Probability of it failing would be the balance of the 100%. So if it's 100% success, if 10% is failure, 90% is the probability. And because it succeeds, there's no impact on this. That is, no additional expenditure will be incurred in case the vehicle runs smoothly. Similarly, for the old car, probability of it failing, you assess based on the life of the car, the way the car has been used, the number of times it has gone for servicing or major repairs or the engine been overhauled, etc. You consider all these conditions, whether the battery is old, what is the condition of the tires, are they new ones, are they old ones. All these factors we consider and assign some probability to the failure rate. Similarly, for your past, it is the balance. You assign some values, that is how much will I have to spend for getting this rectified. So you calculate the value of a decision of making, of buying a new car or the decision of buying an old car like what is illustrated below. That is 20,000 is the initial cost and the cost in case of a failure which comes up to about 1,500 brings the value of this decision to 21,500. For an old car, this is the case that it brings it to 22,000. Now, you have these indicators which will tell you it is better to buy a new car than an old car if you're spending this thing. But then, suppose it was a reasonably new car which you are buying second hand, some old couple who are disposing of their car, etc., and you know it's been maintained in a good condition, probably the probability of it failing would be reduced. And also if it fails, the impact would be lesser. In such case, this overall figure of 22,000 reduces to lesser than this. And then you take a decision of buying a old car. Right? So such decision trees, which is a very elementary technique, there are much more high-end complicated methods for making decisions under uncertainty, which we will not be seeing here in this course curriculum. But this possibly you might have a numerical or something in the exam where you have to actually see what is the value of this impact. So basically they'll be asking for the probability impact value or the EMV of this decision by giving you these two figures. So you have to basically do basic multiplication and subtraction to see the difference and then arrive at the value. Yes, correctly identify risks. It's just not identifying risks. It is that in case not only the conditions under which the risk occurs and the impact that it's going to have. These factors have to be assessed correctly. That is okay. When will the risk be occurring? At what point of time? If my project is 60 or 70% over, possibly a server breakdown at that point of time would have a more impact as compared to a server breakdown at the initial stages where not large amount of data is stored on the servers or more number of people are not accessing this, etc., etc. So that's how you identify identifying risk is one component. Analyzing the impact and the probability of the risk occurring is another major issue wherein a lot of experience comes in and your analytical skills come into play. Right, Sujata? Yeah, Surya, in case this value was, say, for example, the cost of buying an old car was lesser or the probability of its failing and the impact was lesser, it would make a difference. Now the difference between these two values is currently just $500. Saying if this was just 14,000 or 12,000, it becomes 12 plus 7, it makes it 19,000. So it works either ways, where the initial cost is less or the probability of a failure happening is less, etc. Right? Now the next issue is about risk reserves that are built up. We are all aware that as part of the schedule management, first thing was we had broken down the activities into, the WBS into activities. That are those small components of work that actually have to be physically executed by somebody to ensure that your project progresses. And you also done the resource requirement, estimating the resource requirements in terms of man, material and machine effort required. Now based on the conditions under which the project is being executed and what are the possible risks that can happen, there are different levels of padding that can be done for ensuring that resources are available for mitigating the risk. For example, at the first level, 3 activities, $100, the overall cost becomes just $300, but because of the large number of risks which are inherent in these activities, you possibly pad it up when you do your cost estimate, where in cost estimate we had seen that one of the inputs is your risk register or the reserve analysis. So based on your assessment, you have a padding of 600. You set up a control account of 900. That is up to 900 rupees if I spend, so $900 if I spend on this particular work package, I am within my limits. Similarly, somewhere else, at the project manager level or somebody else, he does his own padding. Yeah, 600 is the additional package that you build into the system because 300 has become 900. Similarly, 900 becomes 1100 by padding it with 200, which is an additional package which you build in. Right? Thereafter, you have these contingency reserves all around, which is generally done as a whole for the project, where after you finish all your estimates. Now, the basic difference here is the way it is indicated in your cost estimates. Sometimes it is shown as, for the work package, it's shown as a value of $900. But then if you want good control, you possibly would break it down into activity levels and say 100 for each activity, 600 is a reserve, so that it is not necessary that the risk occurs on all the three of them. It might occur only on one and not occur on the other two. So you'll just be spending $200 extra. But if you don't indicate that, there will be a tendency to overspend and use up all that which has been indicated in your control account. Therefore, to have tight controls on your projects, desirable that you keep these components aside, which only the project manager or the project leads are aware of, that in case of a risk event occurring, I will utilize these resources. Otherwise, this is going to be my cost saving, which I will be showing on the end of the project. Here, contingency reserve is generally taken as the additional package is added because of the risk assessment. This is generally not treated as a risk, it is treated as the cost of the work package itself. That it depends on how you are actually going to qualify. But then yes, the baseline would be 900. Since this is a control account, generally this would be the baseline. That is what I am trying to tell you, that you have to establish two baselines which are separate, like two railway tracks running. That the original baseline is 300. In case a risk occurs, I have 600 reserve, which I am going to use. Now, when you go present your budget to the sponsors or to the customer, you possibly cannot show this separately upfront. Then they start going to question why you are used and all these things. It becomes cumbersome for working. We generally merge that here into this, and as far as the project controls are concerned, this is the baseline. That is 900 is the baseline. But internally, for your own controls, better controls and administration, you have two baselines. One is 300 when things are normal, and if things go wrong, you have a new baseline of 600, because you cannot keep falling back to the change control mechanisms for, additional work or something which had to be done and stop the progress of your work. As a project manager, you would like to have some flexibility to take certain decisions and move on rather than waiting for decisions from somebody, because risk when it happens is unknown. Then you'll have to fall back. So if you have the 600 reserve with you as a project manager, possibly you utilize that and finish it off. Otherwise, what is going to happen? You're going to escalate, raise an issue, it goes up, somebody gives you a decision and it falls back. The planned cost, no, there are, the planned cost is just 1,200, it's not 3. Because the contingency reserve is included in the planned cost. So if you remember your earned value management, there what we treated as planned value will include these reserves. Whereas the budgeted cost will include the planned plus the management reserve. So the difference between these two is called as the management reserve. Yeah, this, well, Anand, this 200 you can call as the project manager's reserve. It's just not the project manager's, just 200, even this 100 is project manager's reserve. This 100 is generally applicable across all activities, right? So you do the padding accordingly. This is actually a function of financial planning, where you have all these estimates and padding which can be done. Are we clear on how this padding is, sir? It's more of a procedural aspect as to how you permit this padding to be done at various levels and how they are bifurcated and kept. If they are kept distinctly separate, it becomes easier for you to administer and control the cost on your projects. Otherwise, what is going to happen? People will treat 900 as the cost of this work package and poof it off, where 600 rupees could actually have been saved in case a risk event doesn't occur. Now all these risk assessments and contingency plans are more for internal activities. So the external customer possibly will not even get to know of it. But then you as a project manager, if you want to improve your processes, you should start exercising better control. Pranab, in case it is going beyond the planned time, the measures that we generally take is putting in additional resources to do the work faster. So instead of 2 resources, which had already worked for 5 days, which was the actual plan, I put in another 2 resources, so I have 4 resources who are working for another 2 days extra. So that cost, it's basically leading to a cost escalation. Though in terms of time also, or in case you had planned a work say for 5 days, and at the end of 3 days, you realize that you are running behind schedule and you got to put in more resources to do additional work to catch up with the planned schedule. So you put in more resources, maintain your timelines, but the cost will obviously go up. So there is no separate head which is there for, time or cost escalations or mitigation. Everything finally boils down to cost, even your quality issues, because if you have to maintain quality either due to rejection or more scrap or, failure rate being higher, basically it boils down to cost escalation because you have to do that much work extra. When you do that much work extra, material consumption, utilization of machines, labor component, everything goes up. So it has a monetary impact on this. So you assess all that and build it here. Now the 600 buffer which has been built up may be due to time escalations that we anticipate rains and work cannot progress at the rate at which we want it to progress. So to ensure that I maintain the progress of the work, I'll have to put in more resources to do the work faster. The effort of these resources is going to be $600 because the material consumption is going to be the same. Whether I do it in 2 days or I do it in 4 days, the material consumption will not change drastically unless the wastage is higher. But this will be for the utilization of the resources, that is, I have to run the machine for a longer duration. So running it for 2 days, I'll be running the machine for 4 days. So the cost of operating that machine additional for 2 days. Then 2 more resource, HR resource for additional 2 days. That value, these are the things which I consider and come up with this additional requirement of funds to mitigate my risk. Right, Praveen? Okay. So now we will see the risk management processes which are done. Risk management includes the processes of conducting risk management planning, identification, analysis, response planning, and risk monitoring and controlling on a project. Therefore, the objective of risk management is to increase the probability and or impact of the positive events and decrease the probability and or impact of the negative events. There are 6 processes starting from plan risk management to monitor and control risk. While 5 of them fall into the planning process group, 1 falls into the last one falls into the monitoring and control process group. Now if you notice, as compared to the other knowledge areas, where the knowledge area risk management plan is made at the end, here it is recommended that you do it up front. And why should you do it up front? We'll see it when we click on the, move to the next slide. Now, plan risk management is the process of defining how to conduct risk management activities for a project. The risk management plan serves as a roadmap for identifying and analyzing and addressing risks on the project. Now, risk itself is an additional burden, and the work that you do to mitigate this risk is over and above the actual effort required for completing a project. which is actually non-productive, or in terms of resource utilization or the ROI, it has got a negative ROI. That is, all the effort that you put in is just to get your project on track. It is not going to increase the value of your project. It is for this purpose that PMI recommends that you first plan upfront and decide whether you are going to take any action or not. That is, in case a risk occurs, will I be handling this risk, or will I say, okay, fine, let me just accept it and move on? That without any issues, I just dash on. Based on this broad approach that you define for yourself, you then do the subsequent activities, because all the plans that you prepare, identification and allocation of resources, they might not get utilized. But then, once the effort is put into planning, that time, a component is lost. Whether it becomes productive or not, questionable. Right? It is for this purpose that you do the plan risk management upfront. Now, the inputs for planning your risk management is basically those. Apart from what is shown here on the slide, you will also have your cost management plan, the schedule management plan, and the communication management plan, which is part of the project management plan. You look at these three components because any risk which occurs is going to affect these four elements of your project. That is the scope, cost, time, and quality. Then you have the enterprise environmental factor, that is the external environment which can actually impact your project. For example, generally before the budget, everybody is glued on to find out what the budget pattern is going to be. Basically because it's going to have an impact on the project. So you'd like to know how much it's going to impact you. Right? You look at that. You also look at, okay, in case there's a sudden turmoil in the market conditions, what is this going to translate in terms of impact on my project? You analyze all these factors. Change in government policies, a new environmental act comes in, or there is some new law for the labor market, that certainly restrictions are imposed on labor utilizations, etc., etc. New taxation policies come into play. All these things have an impact on your project. But then there are certain things which you cannot do anything. You just got to accept it. These are new taxes which are imposed. It's applicable across the board for everybody in the industry. So everybody is going to have a price hike. For example, the very recent price hike on petroleum products, diesel, kerosene, LPG, gas, petrol, everything. Now, very recently we saw in the newspapers that the food industry is hiking up the prices of the items. Now that is going to be done by everybody. So now as an individual, you realize this, you possibly will not waste your time and effort trying to see how I can improve the processes, how I can bring in more, efficiency or utilization of the petroleum products to bring cost savings, etc., etc. You cannot do it, you cannot do it. So you just accept it and leave it at that. But then if there are certain areas where you can improve certain processes and do a bit of saving. For example, generally when you speak of this environmental aspects, there is a discount in the taxation policy which the government gives when you adopt new measures for improving your pollution control. Right? So you balance out the cost-benefit analysis that, okay, in the long run, what is the tax benefit that I'll have by taking up this investment to mitigate my risk. Right? So you analyze all these things. Next is your own internal aspect, that is your OPS. All these things are the inputs that you require. The only tool and technique that is available for doing out the plan risk management is the meetings and analysis. There is no scope for the expert judgment. Individual perceptions and individual fears cannot find a place into this process. This has to be done exclusively on the basis of your analysis of the hard data which is available in front of you. Map the data which is there to the actual plans of your project, what are the objectives of the project, and how to regulate that. You do all these things and then you prepare a risk management plan. So generally speaking, the risk management plan will contain certain inputs on what are the broad risks which can occur, what is the methodology that you are going to adopt for mitigating this risk. There are different strategies for mitigating this risk. What are the tools and data sources that you are going to utilize? Next is the roles and responsibilities which can be assigned to various levels. That who should be made in charge of mitigating certain amount of risk. For example, if there is a technical failure, broadly speaking, based on your own organizational structure, who should be given ownership of a risk occurring due to a technical failure? These sort of issues. Next is the budgetings, then the risk categorizations which generally do for handling the risk. Right? So I think there is a question, example of using management reserve and contingency reserve. The contingency reserve is generally available at the project manager's level, and the project manager uses it based on these conditions. So contingency reserve is generally for a known unknown, that you know that something might happen, and in case it happens, you utilize that. Whereas the management reserve is for an unknown unknown, that something unknown suddenly occurs, and you have to circumvent the situation and get on with your work. Those are the times when you raise a special requisition or you project your case to the management and ask them to give you additional funds. But generally the management reserve, which when it comes into your project, would not be included into your cost baselines. The cost baselines are exclusive of the management reserves which you create for your project. Right? Okay, with this we'll end for the day and take on the rest of the things in the next session. Any questions from anybody on this aspect till which we have covered till now? Arbitration is again mapped into the plan risk management at this stage, that okay, why would the case going for arbitration? Because of some issues which you anticipate. In case it goes in for arbitration, what is the impact on the what you call those three objectives of your project in terms of cost, time? Because the scope and quality would generally not be affected by arbitration. It's more of a time and cost overrun which you will be having. I think the next session will possibly be next week. Yeah, contingency reserve is for something which can happen, but you are not sure. You have estimated that it could happen. If it happens, you have it ready, upfront, already discussed and approved by somebody, that in case it happens, you utilize this money, so that it reduces the reaction time and you are able to take stock of the situation immediately. Thank you, Vinay. Now, Prabeen, there's a question from Prabeen that I'm mapping hardware obsolescence as a risk. Where will I map it? Now, this will possibly map it into your equipment cost, where you possibly would have some reserves built in to buy new equipment to overcome this problem of obsolescence. In case your hardware has become obsolete, the only alternate route available for you is to buy new hardware. So you keep that in case, because of obsolescence, in case my hardware fails, then I'll get some additional equipment. But then that's going to be in a very limited quantity. You're not going to have a complete overhauling of the system. Right. So just that much reserve you built into your estimates. Is that okay, Praveen? Okay then, thank you very much. Have a nice weekend till we meet next. So possibly I'll just talk to the organizers and tell them to announce this as the next session on the same Friday or say Saturday morning, and then we can take it up and continue. Yes, I'll be taking tomorrow's session also, Balaji. No, tomorrow the session is procurement management.